So, I mean, as you will soon realize, I'm not Irish. Though I mean, I have some Irish into me because my name is Patrick, right? As many people here. But I think it's quite obvious that I'm French. But I'm not here as a French citizen, so I'm not the envoy of the ambassador. I'm here as a staff member of the OECD. So for those of you who are not aware of it, the OECD is an international organization based in Paris. We have 34 member countries. It's sometimes called the Club of the Rich Countries, but I think that's less and less true. No. I think you got me wrong. It's less true because we are opening our doors to middle-income countries. Actually, my boss, Mr. Angel Goria, is the former Minister of Finance of Mexico. So we are opening up to this country. So we're no longer the club of the rich countries. We are a club of good policies, the club of good practices. The OECD is a committee-based organization. We have 200 committees, a lot of people coming from governments in Paris to discuss issues of common interest. These days, these issues cover many topics. Broadly, how to make life better, how to improve education, how to improve healthcare system, how to improve social cohesion, how to create jobs. So many topics. So thank you, Joe, very much for inviting me to this beautiful place. I'm truly impressed by this remarkable event, by the quality of the speakers, by the participation of the audience. This is a terrific event, and I'm glad to be here. So, Joe, you asked me to bring an outside view to Ireland. And I think that's very appropriate because what we do every 2 years is to publish an economic report about Ireland. So this is the outside view of the Irish economy. It's actually produced by a committee. So this is the committee view, it's the view of the international community about the Irish economy. So we do this report every 2 years. Some of you are interested. I have a few copies on my chair here. We are working now on the next report, which should be published around September or October 2013. So today I want to give this outside view about the Irish economy. I'll then go into some details about the process of correcting for past excesses, the process of unwinding imbalances, especially the process of deficit reduction and restoring competitiveness. I will talk a little bit about the topic of this session, the prospect for the economy, especially in terms of economic growth. And then I will spend a bit of time on what I think is the major fundamental challenge facing the Irish economy, and that is high unemployment, and how to create jobs, and how to help the job seekers return to the labor market. So, I mean, in a snapshot, I think the outside view is that Ireland is making good progress to correct its past excesses, adjust to imbalances in the housing and the banking sectors, bring down the fiscal deficit, restore competitiveness, create the conditions for return to economic growth. If we go back in history to 2008, I think it's fair to say that the 2008 crisis shattered confidence in Ireland's policies, economic policies, notably your capacity to supervise the banks, to regulate your markets, to maintain sustainable public finance, in general, to keep your economy in order. Because confidence was hit, financial markets closed down to Irish sovereign paper, bank deposits were transferred abroad, interbank lending froze. So this was a dangerous situation. I think it's fair to say that the response to the 2008 crisis was truly remarkable. You took painful, difficult, brave decisions to recapitalize the banks, to increase taxes, to cut public spending, to reduce salaries. Of course, none of that was pleasant, it was painful, but was necessary. And it was heavily supported by financial help from the outside world. Just last year, in 2011, Ireland received 34 billion euros from the European Union through the Financial Stability Fund and also from the IMF. I think it's important to keep in mind that without this outside help, the situation would be worse. The process of reducing the fiscal deficit would have been more rapid and more painful. So this outside financial help has made the process of adjustment smoother and a little bit easier, although it remains painful. So the process of rebuilding credibility, rebuilding trust, regaining confidence, setting a good track record, showing commitment is well underway. It's clear that progress has been made in the right direction and it begins to pay off. Now, let me say a few words about the fiscal situation. It's quite clear that progress is being made to reduce the public deficit, to close the gap between earnings and spending, and to bring order to the public finance. I think I'd like to characterize the process of deficit reduction as being a gradual but steady reduction in the public deficit. Your government deficit is still around 15 billion euros, or at least that was the number for last year, excluding the support to the banks, which was an additional 6 billion euros. So altogether, the government was running a gap of about 21 billion euros last year. This is a large gap, and that's money which comes on top of a public debt which is already quite high. The deficit last year was equivalent to about 9.5% of GDP, and the forecast is that it will come down to about 8.5% of GDP this year. So a reduction of 1% of GDP in 1 year, which is a gradual process. I also travel to countries like Italy, where the process of fiscal reduction is much more rapid and much more painful. So the deficit reduction is, I would say, appropriately gradual. Gradualism means that you can combine fiscal adjustment with some economic growth. Not a lot, but some economic growth. So the deficit has come down, but it's still large. It's actually one of the largest public deficits in the OECD. There are only a few countries that are running larger deficit than Ireland. In Italy and Spain, the public deficit is actually smaller than in Italy. So it's important to pursue the process of reducing the deficit in the years to come. More needs to be done to close the gap, to bring earnings and spending into line. Now, another excess, another imbalance that is being addressed is the external competitiveness. During the boom years, salaries were allowed to increase ahead of productivity. In other words, unit labor cost increased more than in other countries. That reduced the competitiveness of Irish export on international markets. Now, that process is being unwound. Labor costs are coming down. Competitiveness is being restored. Irish exports are increasing quite fast. And the current account balance, the excess of your imports over your exports, is actually coming down, and you are now generating a small current account surplus. So that's another imbalance that is being corrected. Now, a good sign that the market is regaining confidence in Ireland is that the spread is the difference between the interest rate on Irish bonds and the interest rate on risk-free, meaning German bonds. That spread has declined to 5%. This is now lower than the spread paid by Spain and more or less in line with the spread paid by Italy. So the markets are regaining confidence in Ireland's ability to maintain its public finance in order. Now, let me turn to economic growth, which obviously is very important. I think the best way to characterize the current situation is that the economy is not contracting, but growth remains weak. I can see three headwinds facing growth in Ireland. The first, obviously, is fiscal consolidation. Although it's gradual, the process of increasing taxes and reducing spending, which is necessary and needs to be pursued, acts as a brake on economic growth. The second headwind you're facing is poor consumer confidence. Obviously, families are nervous in this situation. They face the risk of losing their jobs. They see their income being cut. So families are saving more. They're repaying their debt. That means that they spend less. So consumption, which is an important driver of growth, is weak. Now, the third headwind that the economy is facing is that exports are being held back by the weak state of the euro area. Obviously, countries in southern Europe, especially in Italy and Spain, are facing a difficult situation. GDP is expected to contract this year in these countries. These are export markets for Ireland, and your exports are being held back by the situation in the Eurozone. So altogether, growth is positive but modest. Last year, GDP in Ireland increased by 1.4%. We expect, the OECD in its projection expect that GDP will increase by 0.6% this year, a bit less. It's positive, but not great. Now, more interesting is what will be growth going forward in next year and later. Now, it's very difficult to predict the future. I think if you meet an economist that can tell you what the future will look like, my advice is don't believe him or her. I cannot predict the future. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the future will be. What I can do is extrapolate trends, make a reasoning based on incoming information, make a scenario based on assumption. So if I do that, and we do that every 6 months at the OECD, we forecast that growth will pick up next year, might reach 2%, so it's better than this year. That's assuming that things are getting better in the Eurozone. That's also assuming that Irish families regain confidence and start to spend rather than save their money. But it's a plausible scenario that growth will pick up and gain momentum next year. 2% is not huge, but it's better than what we see now. Now, more interesting, I think, is what happens after 2013. What is the future of the Irish economy in the medium run? Will you go back to the years of very fast, steady growth, 5–6% per year, which Ireland has enjoyed during the second half of the 90s and during the years up to the financial crisis in 2008? Will you go back to 5 or 6%? Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I cannot predict the future. My guess is that you will not return to growth of 5–6%. I hope you can go back to growth of maybe 3%, or a bit less. So three main reasons behind this guess. The first one is that after a financial crisis, growth remains weak for many years. So there are two famous American economists, Mr. and Mrs. Reinhardt, Vincent and Carmen Reinhardt. They're both great academics. Vincent Reinhardt has worked for many years at the US Federal Reserve in Washington. So back 2 years ago, they published an article called After the Fall, and they reviewed the recovery following financial crisis. They went back to the Great Depression of the 1930s. And they found that after large financial crisis, growth remains weak, unemployment remains high for 10 years. So that's my first argument, my first reason. Second one is that growth was fueled in Ireland by the housing boom and easy bank credit. Now, do you want to go back to these years of easy bank credit and a housing boom? I don't think we want to go back to these years because we know that it doesn't work. This was not good growth. It was unsustainable growth. So we have to find good growth drivers, not those growth drivers that were based on unsustainable sources. Now, the third and last reason, which makes me a little bit cautious, is that since the mid-90s, Ireland's fast economic growth was based on a process that economists call a process of catching up, convergence. It's a process of moving from middle income to high income. It's a process of picking up low-hanging fruits. It's a process of realizing the potential from easy growth drivers. So that took place through foreign direct investment, through foreigners bringing to Ireland new technologies. It was based on a process of women deciding to join the labor market and increasing the labor supply. It was based on a process of many migrants coming to the country. Those were relatively easy sources of growth. And they always happen when a country moves from a middle income position to the high income position. Now, you've done that. I'm afraid to say that going forward, getting strong growth will be more difficult. I think it will be based on innovation, education, research. It will be based on a process that a famous French economist called Philippe Aghion called pushing the frontier of technology. So this is a process not of importing technology, but creating new technologies. And I think that Ireland universities, the private sector, firms have to get together to boost innovation, boost entrepreneurship, and find a new source of growth there. Now, if growth remains at around 3% or less, I'm afraid that it will be too slow to reduce unemployment fast. So I'm concerned that unemployment might remain entrenched in Ireland for many years if nothing is done to address it. As we know, the unemployment rate now is 14.9% in June. This is quite high, actually, by OECD standards. It's one of the highest unemployment rates in the OECD. There are nearly 500,000 people on the live register receiving a job seeker benefit or job seeker allowance. So this is a fundamental challenge. It is a challenge because there is good evidence that when people stay on the dole for a long time, they become discouraged, demotivated, they lose their skills, they withdraw from the labor market, and it's very hard for them to find a job once again. Staying a long time on the dole makes it difficult to return to work. Now, those of you who remember the 1980s, unemployment in Ireland was above 10% for 16 years, between 1981 and 1997. Now, we have to make sure we don't go back to these years, because they were not good years. They were years of high unemployment. So we have to do everything to make sure we don't go back to a long decade of high unemployment. Unfortunately, the news are not good since 2008. Irish people are leaving the country. We've heard that yesterday, but Joe was telling us about people leaving the village of the Glenties. Actually, there's been 35,000 people leaving the country every year in 2010 and 2011. Women are withdrawing from the labor market. People are going in early retirement. So the labor supply is shrinking. The probability of exiting from unemployment is actually quite low. For people who've been unemployed for 12 months or more, according to OECD calculation, the probability of getting a job is as low as 24%. Now, this is the lowest, one of the lowest probability of finding a job for long-term unemployed in the OECD. It's only worse in Greece. Even the probability of finding a job is better in Italy and Spain. So it is very hard for the long-term unemployed to find a job. So like I say, growth will not automatically reduce unemployment. So what needs to be done is to make the labor market function better. There are countries where unemployment is high. Still, there are many job vacancies. So there is a problem of matching between supply and demand. There are people looking for a job, firms looking for workers, and they don't match. Actually, my own country, France, has this problem. A lot of vacancies, a lot of job seekers. The economists call that the problem of the Beveridge curve moving to the northeast corner. Actually, a few years ago, Peter Diamond, a famous economist, got the Nobel Prize for showing that frictions on the labor market prevent unemployment from coming down. So it's important to take measures to reduce the frictions, to improve the matching, to bring supply and demand in line. Now, let me give you 6 lessons drawn from OECD work on how to do that. I think the first one is job creation schemes. Little things that can be done to create jobs for the unemployed. Yesterday night we heard about the stimulus program, €2.25 billion decided by the government a week ago to bring private money into infrastructure spending. I think that's a good program because it's specifically tailored to creating jobs for people who come from construction, who have skills in construction, and have the right competencies to work on building roads, refurbishing buildings, etc. It's a good program. Like any program dealing with infrastructure project, it's important to make a cost-benefit analysis. Is the cost of building these roads, these tunnels, these new buildings in line with the benefits that we expect from them? Now, we heard also yesterday night that this will be financed through PPP, public-private partnership. Some years ago, there was a lot of enthusiasm for PPP, the idea of bringing private money into public infrastructure. I think people today are a little bit more cautious because they realize that PPP can leave large costs for the taxpayer in the form of hidden guarantees. So I'm positive on this stimulus program, but I recommend caution on PPP and on the cost and benefit of this project. Now, the second thing that needs to be done in a phase of high unemployment is obviously to help the unemployed with benefits. Putting money in the pocket of the unemployed is a good way to support consumption. And you've done that a lot. Since 2007, welfare spending has increased by 6% of GDP during a time when the economy was contracting. Without this generous welfare spending, poverty will have increased much more in Ireland. Some work actually suggests that the poverty rate will have increased by 4 percentage points without this help. So it's important to help the unemployed, but there is always a trade-off between helping people and at the same time giving them incentives to go back to work. So finding the right balance between help and incentive is a difficult issue. Now, the third lesson is that there are two types of unemployed, two types of job seekers. People who lose a job and will very quickly find a new job, the short-term unemployed. These people don't need much help. They are skilled, they are smart, they'll find a new job. One doesn't need to worry too much about them. Then there is the second category, which is becoming larger and larger in Ireland, the long-term unemployed, people who have been on the dole for 1 year or more. And those are the ones that we have to worry about because they might lose their skills, become discouraged, and stay unemployed for a long time. Why do these people remain unemployed? Well, it's basically because they don't have the skills that the market is looking for. These are people coming from the construction sector. These are people coming from manufacturing. These are people coming from manual labor. Now, okay, I'm nearly finished. So, some time ago, a report was published on the type of vacancies that firms are offering. Employers are looking for people with skills in computer, electronics, accounting, finance, people who speak foreign languages, and the job seekers don't have these skills. So it's important to retrain them. The government is moving in that direction by reforming FOSS, by reforming the community welfare services, by reforming the Department of Social Protection, by introducing the Pathways to Work program, to activate the unemployed, by assigning a case officer to every unemployed. All of these are good measures. Finally, quickly, two other lessons. For young people, some young people are unemployed, they never worked before. And the risk is that they will stay many years without working. Anything needs to be done to put them in the workplace so that they get hands-on experience. Now, even subsidized artificial ways to put young people in the workplace through vocational training, through apprenticeship, is the right way to give these young people the first experience of working. Now, finally, we need to make sure that the money spent on all this activation training program is well used. One needs to watch the effectiveness of these programs. A lot of great research centers in Ireland, ESRI, now the Fiscal Council, great academic at Trinity College and others can help do that. So just to conclude, the outside view is cautiously optimistic about Ireland. You're moving in the right direction. You're on track to achieving your targets. Obviously, this is a painful, slow process of rebuilding trust and confidence, but this begins to pay off. You are slowly regaining the confidence of the outside world. Deficit reduction is underway. More needs to be done. Growth is weak. It will come back, not at 5-6%, but it will come back. And again, the great challenge is to avoid unemployment from becoming entrenched. The great challenge is not to go back to the years of high unemployment that you've seen in the 80s and the first half of the 90s. So with decisive policies, I have no doubt that Ireland will once again become a great country where to work, to do business, and to innovate. Thank you.